let's talk about something that everybody talks about these days.
Okay.
What are your feelings around Chat GPT?
AI? I knew you were going to ask me that. Honestly, okay, well, one just sidebar, no, like reflection is I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like it's gotten worse lately um,
It's
than it
gotten
was.
more like watered down, or
Yeah, more watered down, more generic, and like more wordy and more dramatic. I'm like, what is happening here? It's like
you can tell people
ChatGPT
are
is
trying to apply personality to their versions of ChatGPT, right?
right. They're like training it, and like that's actually like the funny conversation about it is like again, like anything, right? I think it's a super exciting tool. I I love to play around with it in my
Yeah,
business. I love to use it in many different ways, not just ChatGPT for word generation, but there's so many incredible ways that you can use AI for improving accessibility of your content. Like immediate transcripts on your Zoom calls, like that's AI. Making your content immediately scannable and searchable in your membership sites. I mean, there's so many different tools and use cases where, for me, I think it's exciting. I came up with
did
a
you create a
policy.
mini Alex yet?
Not yet. No, not
No,
yet.
we just got a mini Igor
Did
installed.
you?
Yeah,
I mean, I'll play around with it. To be honest, I think one thing that I find really interesting, like scrolling through my Facebook feed, is there's way more AI generated images in. Obviously I follow like a lot of marketers and people like that than real images. And I'm so curious, like in a year, 2 years, like we'll be at masterminds and we'll all be like comparing, oh, I split test an AI version of me versus the real version of me, which one's better, whatever. For me, obviously, the second part of my mission is to build an empathy empire. So I'm like really all about doubling down on being real. And I think that the more people start using AI to generate content, the more real people are going to stand out more. So I'm not against using it at all. I just think it's important not to like throw the baby out with the bathwater and be like, this is it. I never have to create a piece of content ever again. Yeah, I just think it creates a great opportunity. I train my copywriters on how to use it to do ideation and customer profiling. And there's so many use cases for it
it's
that make
really
it
good at
so
customer
powerful.
profiling.
It
Very,
is,
very good.
it's like, oh, I never would have thought of that
Yeah.
specific challenge. Would I say it in that like overly dramatic way? No, but oh, I didn't even think of addressing the emotion of guilt or, some of these emotions that ChatGPT will help come up with. But at the end of the day, it's not going to write start to finish a piece of, a copy that you're going to want to copy and paste. It just, again, it's a great tool. And so I think there's an ever rising premium right now on people who actually understand marketing and copywriting so that they can use those tools to get great output. And, that's always the way I've taught copywriting. I've never sold templates. I've never sold, like, for me, it's not about understanding the exact, wording. It's about understanding why you're using that wording and understanding the
Mm.
big picture and then applying it in a certain sequence that allows you to be persuasive and all of that. So, the nuts and bolts of it are, I think AI is great. I'm really excited to see where it goes. I think it's going to be revolutionary for businesses in a lot of different ways, not just content generation, but I don't see it replacing, strategic, creative problem solvers anytime in the near future. Can't say what's going to happen after that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a spot on breakdown because I've seen members of my team who they were like capable, but doing okay, getting some things done, getting delayed on some other things, really transform and just become machines with the help of ChatGPT. Just because of the brainstorming feature, just because of being able to automate certain things, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the time-consuming crap like formatting a transcript
Right.
now doesn't. You don't have to do that by hand. All that stuff,
Yeah.
right? It's really really cool, and I'm definitely with you in the category of people that are basically in love with it and use it as a really smart intern or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or
Yeah,
assistant. Yeah, I agree.
yeah.
And I think too.
Before you. I even used it to create a comic book for my kids. Like it actually
Very
wrote all the
cool.
dialogue and everything. So the
Love
artist,
it.
yeah, the artist drew like the images, but all the dialogue between all the characters, the panels, and everything else, it's all been done with
Amazing.
ChatGPT, and that was like the first version
Yeah.
back when just started maybe a month after it got released, and
Right.
now it's much better, and obviously we are better at using it because
Yeah.
ChatGPT will only be as really as good as you are at giving it commands, which is
Yeah.
something only a person with like a team of people working for them and experience of running a team can truly appreciate, because sometimes you think you're building a protocol, it's like, oh, it's obvious and easy to follow, and then your people start executing and you discover there's like 15 gaps
Yeah.
and missing instructions.
I think too, like the way I like to think of ChatGPT is that it's such a great shortcut, but a shortcut is only a shortcut if you know where you're going.
Mm,
And I think a slippery
that's a good point.
slope that a lot of people need to be careful about is they learn to trust, I'm going to say ChatGPT, but it's just AI in general, more than they trust themselves. And I've seen this happen before where someone is customer profiling and they know their customer. I mean, they've worked with their customers for years, they know their customers. But then they put in some prompts into ChatGPT and ChatGPT starts going in like a direction that's like maybe 30 degrees off of like actually what the customer cares about. And it's like, oh, I've never thought of that before. And oh, okay, great, let's use it. But you want to be careful that every piece of information that you're generating, you're asking yourself, is this actually relevant or not? And then there's the whole conversation, which a lot of my community is unaware of, because a lot of my community are people who want to get into copywriting and they hear about ChatGPT. And first of all, they're scared. And then second of all, they don't understand that by default, it's not connected to the internet,
Mm,
and they're using it to do like quantitative research, and they're not realizing that that source it just made up. And
yeah.
so like really getting into
Although
the
that's, I
habit.
think that's going to be fixed in a bit because Bard, they introduced fact checking, I believe, yesterday or
Amazing.
today.
That is
Yeah.
so
So,
needed,
yeah.
because it's just like where did that stat come from? And so having to fact check everything. Obviously, there are ways to web enable ChatGPT and get more accurate information, but I just think it's important that people like don't forget that they have original ideas to bring to the table. One of my students said something the other day which really stuck with me. He said, "AI will never have a spontaneously creative idea." Like, when you're an entrepreneur and you're writing, or you're like in the shower, or you're cooking and you're listening to a podcast, and all of a sudden you just have this idea that's like, oh my God, that's it. Like me coming up with the name for Copy Posse. Like I think you have to remember that, AI is just a generative
It's
model.
funny
So
when
it's
you talk
based on,
about that, you almost like become more mellow. It's like you romanticize the moment when it happened.
yeah, totally. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's a great tool, and I think people need to use it wisely, like anything, like any tool, like it. And so it's exciting. I'm curious to see where it goes and
You know,
continue to learn
I'm
from
gonna
people.
say that I disagree with your student who said that. I was interviewing somebody as well who quoted Noam Chomsky, who I never really
Hmm.
followed or listened to, but Noam Chomsky said something like that something like ChatGPT can't really do what a human can do from a creativity standpoint. But I've seen ChatGPT combine two completely random ideas into something that's really cool, and I mean, let's say that your student is right and it can't do what a human can do, but it can still do 99%, 95% of most of what humans do, even if it itself does not understand what it does.
Right.
And the moments like when these amazing ideas show up seemingly out of nowhere, I think they come from, again, I could be completely off about this. I don't have any scientific proof to back this up, but I think they
Right.
come from associations that
Totally.
happen in the moment, because
That I
the
agree
brain is
with.
a very
Yeah.
associative sort of creature, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that I agree with 100%. Like I don't think there's any such thing as like a brand new idea, but I guess what I think of when I think of creativity, and this is why it's a funny conversation and such a human conversation that we're having, because it's like so subjective. Like what is creativity? I don't know. But the way that I think of creativity is taking two seemingly unrelated ideas and like putting them together in a way that makes perfect sense. And that's the thing that I feel like, ChatGPT, at least in my experience of using it, it's so literal. Like, so I'll give you an example. Like, My brand archetype is the rebel and the outlaw. So my content is very, and the way that I write is I use words and language that are very like that follow that kind of rebellious tone. Like I use swear words, I use really edgy language. But then the other side of that is this sort of empathetic, I know what you're going through and like we're in this together. And I find that like ChatGPT is really good at writing in like, let's say one way, which is like, oh, write with compassion, but then like a side of edginess, that's where it kind of loses the nuanced conversational, but also like it's hard to explain, but that to me it's like it's so good at starting, and then it's important for you to be able to take it over the finish line and make sure that you're not losing like your brand voice and the things that actually you're trying to communicate in the process. Does that make sense?
Did you ever? It does. It very much does. Uh, and because you're such a good copywriter, it's something you can't ignore
Right.
either.
And that's exactly it. Like I realized that not many people would probably lay awake at night
Yeah, it
thinking
has to be
about this.
just right, right? You can't. Good is not good enough for you.
Right.
It has to be just right. So, question: what I've done with my ChatGPT on many occasions for different purposes is I would actually give it. There's a prompt that I use. I give it about 1,000 words of my copy,
Wow. Mm-hmm.
and then I say analyze this style,
Yes.
and then
Mm-hmm.
it'll go and be like give me like 6 or 8 bullet points. Oh, it's conversational, you use metaphors, you tell stories, whatever, like whatever what that particular piece is. Then I
Yep.
ask it to write in that style. Most of the time it's like, for me, it's like 90% good. Have you ever
Mm.
tried something like that?
In one way, it's kind of a similar thing, and I thought this was so genius. The same student who had the thought before shared. We did a training last week on how to use AI to write headlines, and he shared this idea that I can't remember the name of the book where he got this idea from, but you might know if I say it that looking to tabloid headlines as an inspiration
Right.
for
Yeah.
uh, writing, and
I've seen,
so
I've heard that advice from like many copywriting courses.
exactly, and
Yeah.
and they work. We know
Yep.
that the
Oh yeah.
tabloids, despite how trashy they are, we're like, it's like we love the trash. And so what
Give
he
me a
did, and
trash.
it was similar,
I'm a
is he
copy
said,
raccoon. Give me a trash.
"Coffee raccoon." Now that's a brand. Um, you could take this
PM.
tabloidy, yeah, take this tabloidy headline, ask ChatGPT to analyze why it's powerful,
Hmm.
and then feed it and go, okay, now using those
Hmm.
same concepts, write me a headline that is for this customer, avatar selling this type of product. And it actually pumped out, again, not copy paste word for word type of headlines, but like really great ideas that I was like, oh, that's so cool. So I do think that is where it's really good at analyzing and mirroring. And I think anytime you can use that strategy and that sort of prompt sequence, I think you're going to get better results, obviously, than if you're just asking it to write you a great headline.
You know what I most appreciate about ChatGPT, and I'll also be asking you a question about ChatGPT about the personal uses of ChatGPT, but in the professional sense, more often than not, I appreciate that I don't have to start from scratch anymore. Like almost any time. Like I was sitting down to create a curriculum outline for a new program that we launched for a technical component about email sending tools, and it's the component that actually bores me to death, and I'm not really passionate about like talking about how to load a broadcast or do a segment.
Right. Yeah.
um, but I still had to build out a curriculum for one of our coaches to go record it. And I was sitting there literally drawing a blank until I went, wait a second. I went into ChatGPT and I said, are you familiar with ActiveCampaign? Yes, ActiveCampaign is a tool that does blah, blah, blah. Cool. Give me a thorough, curriculum outline with headlines and bullet points for each headline, for a beginner to teach them how to use the technical aspects of the software. And it gave me a bunch, right? A really long outline with lots of like basic things, advanced things. So I just picked and chose what I needed, maybe shifted some stuff around, and bam, you got yourself an outline.
Yeah.
If I didn't have ChatGPT, I'd be thinking about an outline for 3 days and procrastinating and sitting
Totally.
down to do it, then wait, standing up, going upstairs, getting a cup of tea, coming back, getting distracted to go chat with somebody, come back, and
Yes.
it would have been a nightmare. And this was
Yeah.
so easy to do.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I think it's the greatest for is exactly what you said. It removes that like blank page,
Mhm.
blinking cursor moment.
Mhm.
And it takes away anybody's excuse to not get started, because
Mhm.
now anybody is like, okay, hey, you're not the greatest writer. You have a hard time, like, sitting down to focus when you're creating an outline or whatever. Like, this is the greatest freaking place to start ever. And then it allows you to spend more of your time on like the really big needle mover stuff. Like, my friend Stefan Georgi, who is a great copywriter and has a copywriting community, he kind of talked about how it takes like the mundane type of tasks off your plate so that you can have higher level creative functioning, which I actually think is the best way to think about it. It's like, yeah, it takes off that annoying stuff that like is super time consuming, but like truly, someone who could go read a bunch of sources, for you, or an assistant could probably do it for you. And then that allows you to be like, okay, now that I have this outline, like, how am I going to make this like a super great program? And how am I going to like push it over the finish line? And how am I going to market it in a way that's like really powerful and speaks to my audience? And so I 100% agree with you. I think that's
That's a really good
that's
point.
it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.